The wind howled through the city like a wounded animal that morning. It was the kind of cold that sliced through even the thickest coats, the kind of cold that made every breath feel heavy, sharp and painful. New York City, usually loud and restless, was wrapped in a thick white silence. The streets were buried under layers of snow. Shop signs were frosted over, car windows glazed in ice. People hurried past, boots crunching the snow, hands buried deep in pockets, their faces hidden behind scarves and hats. Everyone was just trying to survive the morning chill. But amidst all that rush, all that motion, there was one figure that didn't move. A small boy sat on a city bench near the corner of Fifth Avenue. His body was curled up tight, his thin arms wrapped around himself, trying desperately to hold in what little warmth he had left. He couldn't have been older than 8 or 9, small, fragile, his face pale and lips trembling. His clothes looked worn, far too thin for winter. His shirt was damp, his pants frayed, and his bare feet were planted directly on the icy ground. His breath came out in short, shaky clouds. Every few seconds his teeth chattered so hard it sounded like glass clicking together. He kept whispering softly to himself, maybe to stay awake, maybe just to keep from crying, just a little longer, he muttered, voice weak, barely audible through the wind. People passed him constantly. Some glanced his way for a second, then looked away. A few frowned, not in pity but in discomfort. Nobody wanted to stop. Nobody wanted to be the one to care. After all, in a city that big, it's easier to pretend not to see. A man in a suit walked by, clutching a coffee. He slowed for a moment, staring at the boy, then shook his head and kept walking. A woman in heels looked down at him but turned away as soon as she saw his bare feet, afraid of being asked for help. Even a police car rolled slowly past. Its siren lights dim but didn't stop. The world had gone cold, not just in weather, but in heart. The boy tried to move his fingers, but they were stiff, nearly numb. His eyes blinked slowly, heavy with exhaustion. He hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. His last meal had been a small sandwich someone tossed him out of pity. Since then, he'd been surviving on water and hope. But that morning, hope was running out. He tilted his head back, looking up at the sky, grey, endless, filled with falling snowflakes that melted as they touched his face. He remembered when snow used to make him happy, back when his mom would laugh and help him build little snowmen outside their apartment. That was before everything changed, before his mother got sick, before the doctors said they couldn't help, before his father disappeared from his life. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and closed his eyes. "Mom, I miss you," he whispered into the cold. For a moment it almost felt like she was there, like her voice echoed through the wind, telling him to stay strong, to hold on just a little longer. But then the wind grew harsher, and reality came back like a slap. He pulled his knees tighter to his chest and pressed his face into his arms. He was trying not to cry, but the tears still came, hot, stinging, freezing almost as soon as they touched his cheeks. Then, a sound. Soft footsteps approaching. He didn't bother to look up at first. People sometimes came close, looked, and then left. That was normal now. But this time the footsteps stopped right in front of him. A gentle voice broke through the cold air. "Hey, are you okay?" The boy slowly lifted his head. Standing in front of him was a girl, maybe 15 or 16, her dark curls tucked beneath a worn grey beanie. Her jacket looked old but warm, and her school bag hung off one shoulder. Her brown skin glowed softly against the white snow, and her eyes, wide and full of concern, locked onto his. He didn't answer right away. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He was shivering too hard. The girl crouched down in front of him, lowering herself to his level. "You're freezing," she said softly. "Where are your shoes?" The boy's teeth chattered. I don't have any." She frowned, her eyes darting down to his bare feet, red and raw from the cold. "Oh my God," she murmured, and without hesitation she began unwrapping her scarf. It was a simple wool scarf, old, a little torn at the edges, but she didn't think twice before looping it around his neck. "Here. This will help," she said, tucking it gently under his chin. Her fingers brushed against his icy skin and she flinched. "You're freezing like ice. What's your name?" He hesitated before whispering, Ethan. "Ethan," she repeated, her voice kind. "I'm Aaliyah." For the first time in days, Ethan looked directly into someone's eyes. There was something in hers. Not pity, not judgment, but warmth. Aaliyah looked around. people were still walking by, ignoring them as if they didn't exist. She bit her lip, clearly thinking fast. "Ethan, where's your mom or dad?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know." Aaliyah's heart ached. He looked so small, so lost, and so alone. She couldn't just walk away. "Wait here," she said quickly, standing up. She ran toward a small cafe nearby, disappearing for a few minutes. Ethan sat there, too weak to move, wondering if she'd come back, but she did. A few minutes later, she returned holding a steaming paper cup and a small sandwich. "Here," she said, pressing it into his trembling hands. "It's hot chocolate." "Careful while it's warm." Ethan's fingers shook as he held the cup. The warmth spread through him, and tears filled his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Aaliyah smiled. "Don't thank me yet. You can't stay out here. Come with me. My house isn't far. My mom won't mind, okay?" Ethan's eyes widened. "You don't even know me," she shrugged lightly. "Yeah, but I know you need help." "That's enough." She held out her hand. For a long moment, Ethan just stared at it. Snowflakes were landing gently on her glove, soft, white, pure. No one had ever reached for him like that before. Finally, he reached out, his small, frozen hand sliding into hers. Aaliyah smiled again, gently helping him stand. "Come on, Ethan, let's get you warm." As they walked away together, the city kept moving as if nothing had happened. But for one boy and one girl, something extraordinary had begun. A moment of compassion in a world too cold to care. And though neither of them knew it yet, that simple act, one girl stopping when no one else did, was about to change both of their lives forever. The two of them walked side by side through the swirling snow, leaving small footprints behind, one pair large and steady, the other tiny and uneven. The city was loud again now, the honking of cars, the crunch of boots, the distant hum of subway trains underneath the street. Yet for Aaliyah, everything else seemed to fade away. All she could think about was the small shaking hand gripping hers. Ethan could barely keep up. His steps were slow and each one looked painful. The cold had already bitten through his skin. Aaliyah tightened her hold on his fingers. "Just a little more," she said gently. "My place isn't far." He didn't answer. His eyes darted nervously from passing cars to the tall buildings around them. He wasn't used to someone caring. People had always walked away, and a part of him still expected this girl to do the same. They passed a bakery where the smell of fresh bread drifted into the street. Ethan paused for a moment, inhaling deeply. Aaliyah noticed and smiled. "Smells good, right?" He nodded shyly. "I used to like bread with butter. When Mom was still—" His voice trailed off. Aaliyah slowed her pace, realizing the weight of those unfinished words. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," she said softly. "Let's just get you warm first." They turned down a smaller street where the snow piled thicker, untouched by traffic. Old buildings lined the sidewalks, cracked walls, rusty fire escapes, and flickering streetlights. At the end of the block stood a small apartment complex, paint fading, but a faint orange glow in the windows gave it life. "That's my home," Aaliyah said, pointing. "Come on." Ethan's steps grew slower as they approached the door. He hesitated at the threshold, glancing at her. "Are you sure it's okay? I don't want to cause trouble." Aaliyah shook her head firmly. "Trouble is leaving a kid freezing outside. You're coming in." She pushed open the door. A rush of warm air met them, carrying the scent of cinnamon and laundry soap. The hallway light flickered overhead as they climbed 2 flights of stairs. Ethan clung to the railing, his small hand trembling. When they reached the apartment, Aaliyah fished out her keys and smiled nervously. "My mom's working a double shift at the hospital today. It's just us for now." She opened the door and the sound of quiet music spilled out, soft gospel playing from an old radio. The living room was tiny but cozy, a second-hand couch, mismatched curtains and walls decorated with family photos. Ethan stepped inside timidly, almost afraid to touch anything. The warmth hit him like a blanket. His body shook again, not from the cold this time, but from relief. Aaliyah quickly pulled off her gloves and hurried to a small closet. "Hold on, I've got something for you." She returned with a big towel and an old sweatshirt that looked like it once belonged to her older brother. "Here, you can change in there," she said, pointing toward the bathroom. Ethan looked at her uncertainly. "You're really letting me stay here?" "Of course," she said simply. "Now go before you turn into an ice cube." A few minutes later, Ethan came out of the bathroom swimming in the oversized sweatshirt but smiling shyly. His hair was damp from where he'd tried to dry it with the towel. Aaliyah grinned. "Much better. Sit down. I'll make you something to eat." He sat carefully on the couch, still unsure if he belonged there. He watched as Aaliyah moved around the small kitchen, humming quietly. She pulled out a pot, heated milk on the stove, and opened a loaf of bread from the counter. Within minutes, the smell of warm cocoa filled the air. She brought him a plate of toasted bread with butter melting on top and a steaming cup of hot chocolate. Ethan's eyes widened. "Is this for me? Who else?" she teased. "Eat." He took a bite and then another and then another. It wasn't much, but to him it felt like a feast. The warmth spread through his chest. He looked up at her between bites and whispered, "Thank you." Aaliyah sat down across from him. "You don't have to thank me. I couldn't just walk by." He lowered his eyes. "Everyone else did." Her chest tightened. "Yeah, well, not everyone knows what it's like to need help." They sat in silence for a while, the radio softly filling the space between them. Ethan finished the toast and leaned back, exhaustion catching up to him. His eyelids grew heavy, but he tried to stay awake. "You can sleep," Aaliyah said gently. "You're safe here." He hesitated again. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Positive. I'll tell my mum when she gets back." "She won't mind." Ethan slowly curled up on the couch, pulling the blanket she handed him up to his chin. "Your mum's nice?" he murmured sleepily. "The nicest," Aaliyah said, smiling. "She's the one who taught me to help people, no matter who they are." Ethan blinked slowly. "You're like her, then?" Aaliyah chuckled softly. "I hope so." Moments later, Ethan's breathing steadied and he was asleep. Aaliyah watched him quietly. In the dim light of the living room, he looked so small, so peaceful. Yet there was a sadness behind his face, a story he hadn't told yet. She pulled the blanket tighter around him and whispered, "You're safe now, Ethan, I promise." She turned off the lights, leaving only the warm glow of a lamp and the soft hum of the radio. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. But inside that tiny apartment, something rare had bloomed. A spark of hope, a reminder that kindness still existed in a world that often forgot how to care. Hours later, the door creaked open softly. Aaliyah's mother, Mrs. Harris, stepped inside, tired from her long hospital shift. She hung up her coat, slipped off her shoes, and stopped when she saw the unfamiliar figure on the couch. Her eyebrows rose. "Aaliyah?" Aaliyah hurried over, whispering, "Mom." "Don't wake him." He was outside in the cold alone. "I couldn't just leave him there." Mrs. Harris looked from her daughter to the boy, her expression softening. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Oh, Aaliyah." "I know," Aaliyah said quickly. "But look at him. He had no shoes, no coat. He was freezing." Mrs. Harris knelt beside the couch, brushing a strand of hair from Ethan's face. She could feel how thin he was, how fragile. "Poor child," she murmured. "You did the right thing, baby. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Aaliyah's shoulders relaxed. "Thanks, Mom." Mrs. Harris smiled faintly. "Now go get some rest. You've done enough hero work for one night." Aaliyah chuckled softly and went to her room. Mrs. Harris lingered a moment longer, tucking the blanket more securely around the sleeping boy. Then she whispered under her breath, "Who are you, sweetheart? And what happened to you?" Ethan stirred slightly but didn't wake. Outside, the snow kept falling, silently covering the world in white. Inside that small apartment, 3 lives had quietly intersected, one act of kindness pulling them together, weaving a bond that none of them yet understood. For the first time in a long time, Ethan slept without fear. He dreamed of warmth, of laughter, of a home that didn't disappear when he opened his eyes. And somewhere deep inside his tired little heart, a small voice whispered, "Maybe the world isn't as cold as I thought." Morning sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of the small apartment, painting soft golden stripes across the floor. The city outside had finally quieted. Snow still clung to rooftops, sparkling like crystals in the pale light. Inside, everything felt calm, almost too calm. Aaliyah stretched, still half asleep, and for a brief moment she wondered if yesterday had only been a dream. The cold boy on the bench, the trembling hands, the way he'd looked at her like she was his last hope. It all felt unreal, But then she heard it, a soft clatter from the kitchen. She sat up quickly and peered out her bedroom door. There, standing awkwardly in the middle of the small kitchen, was Ethan. He was wearing the oversized sweatshirt she'd given him, sleeves dangling far past his hands, and he was holding a cup of water like it might shatter if he gripped it too tightly. He froze when he saw her watching. "Say sorry," he said nervously. "I didn't mean to wake you." Aaliyah smiled sleepily. "So you didn't. You're up early." Ethan shrugged shyly. "I'm not used to sleeping this long. It feels weird." She walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge, pulling out eggs and milk. "Weird is good sometimes," she said. "Means your body finally got some rest." Ethan's stomach rumbled audibly and his face turned red. Aaliyah laughed softly. "Guess that means it's breakfast time." She cracked eggs into a small frying pan, humming a tune while the butter sizzled. The smell quickly filled the air, warm, rich, comforting. Ethan watched her, fascinated by how easily she moved, how she smiled like cooking eggs was the most important thing in the world. He didn't say much, but his eyes said everything: gratitude, confusion, disbelief. It had been so long since someone cared for him without asking for anything in return. When she slid a plate in front of him, 2 fried eggs, toast and a drizzle of syrup, he stared at it for a moment before picking up his fork. "Are you sure it's okay?" he asked again, almost afraid to take the first bite. Aaliyah smiled. "Ethan, it's breakfast, not gold. Eat before it gets cold." He laughed for the first time, a quiet, uncertain laugh, but a real one. They ate together at the small kitchen table, the sound of forks against plates mixing with the faint hum of the radio. When they finished, Aaliyah gathered the dishes, but Ethan jumped up to help. "Let me," he said quickly. "It's the least I can do." She hesitated, then handed him a dish towel. "Okay, but you're on drying duty." For the next few minutes, the two of them worked side by side, chatting about little things. Her school, her friends, how much she hated math, how Ethan used to love drawing before things got bad. It wasn't a deep conversation, but it was normal, and for Ethan, normal felt like a gift. When the last plate was put away, they sat on the couch. Aaliyah's mother, Mrs. Harris, stepped out of her bedroom just then, her nurse's uniform freshly pressed. Her eyes softened when she saw Ethan sitting there. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said kindly. Ethan stood up quickly, nervous again. "Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for letting me stay." Mrs. Harris smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me, honey. Any friend of my daughter's is welcome here." Ethan looked confused. "Friend?" Aaliyah elbowed him gently. "Yeah, friend. Got a problem with that?" He grinned shyly. "No, ma'am." Mrs. Harris chuckled. "That's better. Now, Aaliyah, I'm heading to the hospital. You two behave, okay?" "Yes, Mom," Aaliyah said automatically. Before she left, Mrs. Harris placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're safe here, okay? No matter what's going on out there." Her words hit him harder than she knew. No one had told him he was safe in a very long time. He nodded silently, swallowing the lump in his throat. After Mrs. Harris left, the apartment fell quiet again. Aaliyah turned to Ethan. "So, you want to tell me how you ended up out there?" Ethan's face fell. He stared at his hands. "It's complicated." "I've got time," she said softly. He took a deep breath. "My mom died last year. My dad—" He didn't know how to deal with it. He stopped coming home. He just worked all the time. We lived in this big house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Then one day I heard him arguing on the phone. He said I was a reminder of everything he lost. Aaliyah's heart sank. "I ran away that night," Ethan continued quietly. "I thought he'd come looking for me. But he didn't." His voice cracked. "It's been 2 weeks." Aaliyah didn't say anything. She just sat beside him, letting the silence fill the room. Then gently she said, "You didn't deserve that, Ethan, none of it." He looked up at her, eyes shining with tears. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Aaliyah smiled softly. "Because someone has to be." Ethan blinked. "Even if I'm a stranger?" "Especially then," she said. "People forget that strangers are just friends we haven't met yet." He didn't know what to say. He'd never met anyone like her before, someone who gave without asking, who saw him not as a burden but as a person. As the day went on, Aaliyah showed him around the apartment. She pointed out their old family photos. Her mom in her nurse's uniform, her dad who'd passed away years ago, a younger version of herself grinning with missing teeth. We've had hard times too, she said. But Mom always says hard times don't last. Good hearts do. Ethan nodded, repeating the words quietly. Good hearts do. By evening, the sky outside had turned shades of orange and pink. Snowflakes floated past the window like feathers. Ethan sat by the window, watching them fall. Aaliyah brought him a blanket and sat beside him. You know, she said, when I was little I used to think every snowflake had a story. Like maybe someone up there was sending them down as tiny letters to people who needed hope. Ethan smiled faintly. What do you think they're saying now? She looked out at the drifting snow. Maybe they're saying you're not alone anymore. The words hit him deeply. He turned to look at her. This girl with the torn jacket and the kind eyes who had given him food, warmth, and something even more precious, a reason to believe in people again. That night, as they prepared for bed, Aaliyah set up a pillow and blanket for him on the couch again. Ethan hesitated. Aaliyah? Yeah? Do you think I'll ever see my dad again? She thought for a moment, then said softly, Maybe, but when you do, you'll be stronger. And he'll see the person you've become. Ethan smiled weakly. You really think so? She nodded. I do. He lay down, pulling the blanket close. For the first time, he didn't feel afraid of what tomorrow would bring. And as Aaliyah turned off the lights and whispered goodnight, neither of them knew that this small act of kindness, the simple decision to stop for a boy in the snow, was about to start a chain of miracles that would change their lives forever. Because sometimes, the people with the least to give end up giving the most. And sometimes, the ones who feel invisible become the reason the world remembers what it means to care. The days that followed slipped quietly into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Morning sunlight filtered through the cracked blinds, filling the small apartment with a kind of soft peace that seemed to heal more than just the body. Aaliyah would head to school for a few hours, while her mother worked her long hospital shifts, and Ethan would stay home helping tidy up, reading the few old books they had, or watching the snow fall from the window. Each evening, when Aaliyah returned, she'd find him waiting near the door, shy but smiling. He'd help her with her backpack, ask about her day, and listen to her stories about school as if they were the most important thing in the world. At first, he spoke very little about himself. He answered questions with short sentences and changed the subject whenever things got too close to his past. But Aaliyah noticed the way his smile sometimes faded when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his eyes, bright and innocent, often carried a shadow, a weight far too heavy for a boy his age. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the radiator hissed softly, Aaliyah found him sitting on the couch, staring at the flickering TV. He wasn't really watching. His hands were clenched in his lap, his gaze distant. You okay? She asked, sitting beside him. He nodded quickly. Yeah, just tired. But Aaliyah could tell that wasn't the truth. You've been quiet all day, she said gently. Something wrong? Ethan hesitated. He wanted to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Finally, he whispered, Do you ever miss someone so much it hurts to breathe? Aaliyah blinked, surprised by the sudden question. Yeah, she said softly. My dad, he died when I was little. Some days it still feels like he's just gone, like a piece of me went with him. Ethan looked down at his hands. That's how it feels with my mom. The room fell silent. Outside, snow tapped lightly against the window. She used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep, he continued quietly. Even when she got sick, she'd hum from her bed. I'd sit beside her and hold her hand. I thought she'd get better. She always said everything would be okay. His voice trembled. But it wasn't. Aaliyah reached out and placed her hand gently over his. I'm sorry, Ethan. He swallowed hard. After she died, Dad stopped talking to me. He'd leave early, come home late, and when he was home, he'd just stare at the wall. Sometimes he'd look at me like I was the reason she was gone. Tears welled up in his eyes. One night I heard him tell someone on the phone that he wished he could start over without me. Aaliyah's breath caught. I packed a bag, Ethan whispered. I thought maybe if I left he'd be happier. Maybe he'd finally rest. He wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by his tears. But I didn't think it would be this hard. The streets are scary. People don't look at you. They look through you like you're invisible. Aaliyah squeezed his hand. You're not invisible. Ethan, not anymore. He looked at her then, and for the first time, The sadness in his eyes softened just a little. That night after he fell asleep, Aliyah sat awake at the kitchen table, her mind racing. She wanted to help him, really help him, but how? She didn't know who his father was, where he lived, or how to find him. And part of her wondered if finding him would even be right. When her mother returned from her night shift, Aliyah told her everything. Mrs. Harris listened quietly, her tired eyes full of empathy. "That poor child," she murmured. "No wonder he's so lost." Aliyah frowned. "What should we do, Mom? Should we try to call someone?" Mrs. Harris thought for a long moment before answering. "Let's wait a little. He's fragile right now. We don't want to scare him off. But we can talk to social services later. Maybe find a way to contact his family safely." "Okay," Aliyah said softly. In the following days, she made it her mission to help Ethan smile again. She taught him little things, how to play her favorite card games, how to make hot chocolate just right, even how to dance when their old radio played upbeat songs. At first he laughed nervously, unsure how to join in, but little by little his laughter grew louder, freer. Sometimes, though, she'd catch him staring out the window again, lost in thought. Once, when a black car passed on the street below, he jumped and ducked behind the curtain, his heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Aliyah asked, alarmed. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just thought I saw—" He trailed off. Never mind, but she knew. He was afraid, not of strangers, but of being found. One Sunday afternoon, Aliyah invited him to come with her to the small park nearby. The snow had melted slightly, revealing patches of grass and puddles that reflected the cloudy sky. Children were playing, parents chatting, laughter echoing faintly in the air. Ethan stood near the swings, watching. "I haven't been to a park in a long time," he said quietly. "Then let's make it count," Aliyah said with a grin, grabbing the swing beside him. "Come on." He hesitated, then sat down. When she pushed off the ground, he followed, their laughter mixing with the crisp winter air. For a brief moment, Ethan forgot the pain, the fear, the loneliness. He felt free. But then he noticed a man in a long coat standing across the street, holding a phone and looking around. His heart skipped. For a second, he thought it was his father, or someone sent to drag him back. He froze mid-swing. "Aliyah," he whispered, "can we go home?" She noticed his pale face and immediately nodded. "Of course." They hurried back to the apartment. Inside, Ethan paced nervously, pulling at the sleeves of his sweatshirt. "Ethan, what's going on?" Aliyah asked softly. He stopped, staring at the floor. "What if they find me? What if they take me back? He'll be angry. He'll send me away for good." Aliyah placed both hands on his shoulders. "No one's taking you anywhere until you're ready. You're safe here, I promise." He looked into her eyes, so steady, so full of truth, and something inside him broke open. "I don't want to go back," he said, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I just want to be somewhere I belong." "You do belong," she said firmly. "Right here." In that moment, a strange calm filled the room, a warmth that came not from the heater but from understanding. That night, Aliyah's mother sat beside Ethan and told him stories about the patients she cared for, people who had lost everything but still found hope. "You see, sweetheart," she said gently, "pain doesn't mean your story is over. Sometimes it's just the page before something beautiful." Ethan listened silently, her words sinking deep into his heart. Later, when the lights were off and the apartment grew quiet, he lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. He thought about his mother's songs, about his father's anger, about Aliyah's kindness. And slowly his tears stopped. For the first time in weeks, his last thought before sleep wasn't fear, it was gratitude. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing for sure. In a world that had turned its back on him, two strangers had opened their door and their hearts. And even though the pain was still there, it didn't hurt quite as much, because now he wasn't alone in it anymore. Morning sunlight filtered through the frosted window, painting golden lines across the worn-out kitchen table. The smell of pancakes and sizzling butter filled the tiny apartment. Aliyah hummed softly as she flipped another pancake, while Ethan sat nearby, watching her with quiet curiosity. He hadn't had a real breakfast in weeks. The first time he'd tasted her cooking, He could hardly believe something so simple could feel so comforting. It wasn't just the food, it was the feeling behind it. The warmth. The care. Mrs. Harris walked in, her nurse's uniform slightly wrinkled from another long night shift. But her tired eyes softened the moment she saw Ethan. "Morning, sweetheart," she greeted. "You sleep okay?" Ethan nodded with a shy smile. "Oh, yes, Mom." "Good, eat up," she said gently, patting his shoulder. "We've got a big day ahead." He didn't ask what that meant. He was just grateful to be seen, to be spoken to with kindness, like he mattered. As they ate together, Aaliyah started chatting about her day, her school, and her dreams. She told him she wanted to be a teacher one day, someone who helps kids believe in themselves no matter where they come from. Ethan listened closely, his fork frozen mid-air. He'd never thought much about dreams before. In his house, success wasn't something you dreamed about. It was something you were told to achieve, whether you wanted it or not. After breakfast, Aaliyah grabbed her backpack. "You want to come with me?" she asked. "It's Saturday. We're helping out at the community center. We give out food and clothes to families who need them." Ethan hesitated. Will they ask who I am?" She shook her head. "No one will care. They'll just be happy you're helping." He took a deep breath and nodded. The community center was a small red brick building near the edge of town, buzzing with energy. People carried boxes, sorted clothes, and laughed as children ran around with hot chocolate cups in hand. The smell of soup mixed with the crisp winter air. Ethan stood close to Aaliyah at first, nervous and unsure. But as the hours passed, he began to relax. He handed out blankets, refilled water cups, and even helped a little boy tie his shoelaces. Every time someone said thank you, something inside him glowed, a light he hadn't felt in a long time. At one point, he noticed a little girl crying in the corner. Her boots were soaked, her tiny hands trembling. Without thinking, Ethan knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly. "What's wrong?" "My feet are cold," she sniffled. He looked around, then spotted a box of donated clothes nearby. Rummaging through it, he found a pair of small fuzzy socks and gently helped her put them on. "Better?" he asked with a smile. The girl nodded, hugging him tightly. "Thank you." Aaliyah watched from across the room, her eyes glistening. It was the first time she'd seen Ethan take initiative. Not out of duty, but from genuine care. He wasn't the scared boy shivering on the street anymore. He was healing, one act of kindness at a time. When they walked home that evening, the sky painted shades of purple and gold. Ethan felt a strange calm in his chest. "Aaliyah," he said after a while, "why do you and your mom do all this? Helping people you don't even know." She looked at him, smiling softly. "Because when you've been through hard times, you understand how it feels to be invisible. My mom always says, if you can make one person's day a little brighter, that's enough light for both of you." Ethan thought about her words. Enough light for both of you. They echoed in his heart like a quiet melody. That night, after dinner, Mrs. Harris sat beside Ethan with a cup of tea in her hands. "You know," she began, "I used to be angry at the world too. After my husband died, I thought life had stolen everything from me. I didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to see anyone. But then one day a patient told me, kindness saved my life, and I realized that's what we all need, someone to remind us we're still worth something." She looked him straight in the eyes. "You're worth something too, Ethan. Don't ever forget that." Her words hit deeper than anything he'd heard before. Worth something. No one had told him that in years. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Ethan began to laugh again. He learned how to cook simple meals, how to joke with Aaliyah, even how to fold laundry properly, which she found hilarious because he always managed to mess it up. But beneath the laughter, something else was happening too, something even Aaliyah didn't realize. Ethan was learning what real love looked like. Not the kind that came wrapped in gifts and fancy cars, but the kind that showed up every day, quietly, without asking for anything in return. Love. That looked like Aaliyah's mom working double shifts, but still making time for dinner. Love that looked like Aaliyah sharing her last cookie without hesitation. Love that looked like being seen, truly seen. For who you are, not what you have. One evening, as snowflakes drifted past the window, Ethan asked softly, "Aaliyah, do you think people can change?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, If someone's done bad things, if they've hurt people, do you think they can ever become good again? Aaliyah thought for a moment. I think everyone can change, she said, but they have to want it. They have to choose it every single day. Ethan looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. I hope my dad can. Aaliyah didn't push further. She just nodded and said, maybe one day he will. But right now you're changing too, and that's what matters. Her words lingered in his heart long after she went to bed. That night Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked quietly to the living room and stood by the window, watching the snow fall. The city lights shimmered in the distance, soft and far away. He thought about his mother's songs, his father's silence, the people at the shelter, and the warmth of this little apartment. He realized something profound. The world hadn't given up on him. He had given up on himself. Tears slipped down his cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release. For the first time in his young life, Ethan understood what it meant to be loved. Not because of who his family was, not because of his last name, but because he was human. He turned to see Mrs. Harris standing in the doorway, watching him quietly. Can't sleep? She asked softly. He shook his head. Just thinking, she smiled. That's a good sign. You've got a good heart, Ethan. Don't ever let the world harden it. Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. For everything. Mrs. Harris smiled, brushing his hair gently. Thank Aaliyah, she said. She saw you first. He laughed softly. Yeah, she did. That night, Ethan finally slept peacefully. No nightmares, no fear. Just warmth. He didn't know it yet, but the lesson he'd learned in that small apartment would stay with him forever. That real wealth wasn't measured by what you owned. It was measured by how much love you could give. And soon fate would test that truth in a way none of them could have ever imagined. It was a cold afternoon when everything began to change. The winter sun had barely risen, its pale light spilling weakly through grey clouds. Aaliyah was at school, and Mrs. Harris was working a double shift. Ethan sat by the window, watching the snow fall, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. It had been almost a month since he found refuge in their home. A month since he'd known what it felt like to smile again. He had started sketching lately, little drawings of things that made him feel safe. The warm kitchen, Aaliyah's laughter, Mrs. Harris's gentle smile. He didn't have many crayons, but that didn't matter. For once his world had color again. Then came the knock on the door. It wasn't the soft, familiar knock of Aaliyah or her mother. It was firm, deliberate, the kind that carried authority. Ethan froze. His heartbeat quickened. Slowly he peeked through the window. A black SUV was parked by the curb. Two men in dark coats stood outside, one of them holding a phone. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew that car. He had seen it before, outside his father's mansion on nights when important guests arrived. No, he whispered, stepping back from the window. They found me. The knocking grew louder. Hello? This is Detective Moore from the city police. We just want to ask a few questions. Ethan's breathing grew shallow. His mind raced. He thought about running again, out the back door into the streets. But he remembered the freezing nights, the hunger, the fear. He couldn't do it again. Not now, another knock. Son, we're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk. He hesitated, trembling, then finally opened the door a crack. The detective looked at him, a tall man with kind eyes, snow on his shoulders. Ethan Collins? He asked softly. Ethan didn't answer. It's okay, the man continued. Your father's been looking for you for weeks. He's worried sick. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, he's not, the detective sighed. He hired private investigators. He's been searching everywhere. Your photo's been on every missing child report in the city. Ethan's throat went dry. I'm not missing. I left. I know, the detective said gently. But he wants to see you. He's waiting at the precinct. He won't stop until he does. Before Ethan could respond, Aaliyah's voice echoed from behind. What's going on? She stood in the hallway, her backpack half open, eyes wide with confusion. She had just gotten home from school. The detective turned toward her. You must be Aaliyah. You're the one who took care of Ethan. She nodded slowly. Yes. Is something wrong? He smiled kindly. You did the right thing. You may have saved his life, but his father wants him home." Ethan shook his head quickly, panic rising. "No, I don't want to go. Please don't make me." Alia stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Ethan, it's okay," she whispered. "Let's just talk to them. We'll figure it out." But he was trembling, tears streaming down his face. "You don't understand. He doesn't love me. He never did. I can't go back." The detective looked troubled. "Listen, kid. I don't know your story, but your father, he's been through a lot too. Maybe things can be different now." Alia stood protectively in front of Ethan. "If he's scared, you can't just take him away." The detective hesitated. "You're right. We're not forcing him. But please, let us talk inside, just for a few minutes." Alia finally nodded. They all sat around the kitchen table. The detective placed his phone on the table and pressed a button. A video call connected. A man's face appeared on the screen, sharp features, silver hair at his temples, and eyes filled with exhaustion. The background showed a luxurious office, marble walls and gold accents, a stark contrast to the humble warmth of the Harris home. "Ethan," the man breathed. His voice cracked slightly. "Son, is that really you?" Ethan couldn't speak. He just stared at the screen, emotions colliding inside him, anger, grief, longing. "Where have you been?" His father continued. "I've searched everywhere. The police, the news, the hospitals." "You mean your assistants searched?" Ethan interrupted bitterly. "You didn't even notice when I left." Mr. Collins winced. "That's not true." It is true," Ethan shouted, his voice shaking. "You stopped talking to me after Mom died. You stopped looking at me. You stopped seeing me. You said you wished you could start over without me." A heavy silence filled the room. Even the detective looked away. Mr. Collins's eyes glistened. "I was angry, Ethan, broken. I lost your mother, and I didn't know how to handle it. I said things I didn't mean. I've hated myself every day since you disappeared." Ethan's voice cracked. "Then why didn't you tell me that before?" "Because I didn't know how," his father admitted, tears forming. "I thought I'd lost you forever. I thought I'd never get the chance to say I'm sorry." Alia's mother, who had quietly arrived during the call, placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "sometimes people hurt the ones they love because they don't know how to face their own pain. But that doesn't mean they don't love you." Ethan looked at her, torn. "How do I know it won't happen again?" Mr. Collins swallowed hard. "You don't," he said honestly. "But I'll spend the rest of my life proving it won't. Please, son, come home." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. He wanted to believe him, but the scars inside him ran deep. He turned to Alia, eyes pleading. "What should I do?" She blinked back tears. "That's up to you, Ethan, but maybe going back doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it means healing." Ethan looked down at his trembling hands. The little boy who had run away from pain was now being asked to run toward it, to forgive, to trust, to love again. Finally, he took a shaky breath and whispered, "Okay, I'll go." Mr. Collins let out a sob, covering his face. "Thank you, son. Thank you." Before leaving, Ethan hugged Alia tightly. Neither wanted to let go. "You saved me," he whispered. "You showed me what love really is." Alia smiled through her tears. "Don't forget that, okay? You're stronger than you think." As he stepped outside, snowflakes landed on his hair, glistening in the pale afternoon light. The black car door opened, and he turned one last time to wave. Alia and her mother waved back, smiling through the ache. The car drove away slowly, disappearing into the white distance. Inside, the apartment felt quieter than ever. Alia looked at the empty couch where Ethan used to sleep, her heart heavy but full of pride. She didn't know what would happen next. But she did know this. The boy who came to them broken was now going home whole, and somewhere deep inside, Ethan understood the same thing. This wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of forgiveness. The black SUV rolled slowly through the snow-covered gates of the Collins estate. Tall iron bars loomed like cold sentinels, guarding a world that once felt like home, and now to Ethan felt like a memory from another life. He pressed his forehead against the frosted window, watching the sprawling mansion come into view. The white marble steps, The glistening fountains frozen mid-spray, the perfect symmetry of a place that had everything, except warmth. His father sat quietly beside him in the car, his hands folded tightly on his lap. The silence between them was heavy, not angry, just uncertain, fragile. When they reached the grand entrance, a team of house staff hurried forward. They froze when they saw Ethan. Some gasped. Some whispered. It was as if a ghost had returned. "Welcome home, young master," one of them murmured softly. Ethan didn't answer. He just looked around. At the same marble floors, the same tall paintings, the same grand chandelier that hung from the ceiling like an icy star. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet it all felt different. His father gestured toward the stairs. "Your room's just as you left it." Ethan followed him up the wide staircase. Every step echoed memories, his mother's laughter, the night she'd tuck him in, the way her perfume used to fill the halls. He swallowed hard as they reached his old room. When he opened the door, he froze, and the room was spotless. His books were still neatly arranged, his toys untouched. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of him and his mother, her arms around him, both of them smiling wide. Ethan picked it up, tracing her face with his thumb. "So you kept this," he whispered. His father nodded quietly. "I couldn't bear to move anything. It made me feel like you were still here." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of years hung between them, years of silence, regret, and unspoken love. Finally, his father said softly, "Ethan, I owe you an apology, not just for what I said, but for everything after." Ethan looked up, his eyes guarded. "I lost your mother," his father continued, voice trembling. "And when I did, I lost myself. I blamed the world. I blamed God. And when I saw you and her eyes, her smile, I saw the pain all over again. Instead of loving you through it, I shut you out." He took a deep breath, tears gathering. "Every night I sat in this house full of gold and silence and wondered what kind of man I'd become. You were out there, alone, and I was here drowning in guilt." Ethan's throat tightened. "Then why didn't you come for me sooner?" "I tried," his father said desperately. "I hired people. I searched every day, but it was like you vanished. When I saw your picture on the police report, He stopped, voice breaking. "I thought I'd never see you again." Ethan stared at him. The man standing before him wasn't the cold, distant figure he remembered. This man was broken, human, a father stripped of pride. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Ethan whispered. Mr. Collins nodded slowly. "You don't have to. Not yet. But I hope one day you can." Ethan turned away, staring out the window. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass, catching the light like tiny stars. Forgiveness, the word echoed in his mind. He had learned about love and kindness in that little apartment. But forgiveness was harder. That night the mansion was quiet. The clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the faint hum of the heater, all of it felt too big, too empty. Ethan sat alone on his bed, holding his mother's photo. "Mum," he whispered, "what would you do?" He could almost hear her voice, soft and soothing, like a memory carried on the wind. "Love, Ethan, always love, even when it's hard." The next morning, Ethan woke early. The house was still asleep. He slipped on his shoes and walked outside, down the path that led to the garden his mother used to tend. The roses were gone, replaced by frost and silence. He knelt and brushed the snow away from the small plaque at the base of the garden wall, his mother's name engraved in gold. He sat there for a long time, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I miss you," he said softly. "But I think I understand now. You always said people aren't perfect, but love is." He looked up at the sky, pale pink with morning light. "I think I'm ready to forgive him. Not because he deserves it, but because you'd want me to." Behind him, footsteps crunched softly in the snow. He turned to see his father standing a few feet away, watching silently. "I thought I'd find you here," Mr. Collins said gently. Ethan stood, brushing off his hands. "I was just talking to Mom." His father nodded, his eyes wet. "I talk to her too, every day." For a moment they just stood there, two lonely souls connected by the same love and the same loss. Ethan took a shaky breath. "Dad, I forgive you." The older man froze, his lips trembling. "You what?" "I forgive you," Ethan repeated, voice breaking. "For everything. For the words, for the silence, for letting me go. I don't want to carry that pain anymore." His father's face crumpled. He stepped forward, then hesitated, afraid to touch him, afraid to break the fragile moment. But Ethan didn't hesitate. He closed the gap and threw his arms around his father. For a moment, Mr. Collins stood in stunned silence, then his arms wrapped around his son tightly, as if afraid he might disappear again. Both of them sobbed, their tears falling onto the snow. "I'm so sorry," his father whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay, Dad," Ethan whispered back. "We can start over." When they finally pulled apart, there was something new between them, not just forgiveness, but peace. That evening, Ethan sat at the grand dining table. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small in that giant house. His father joined him, and they shared a simple meal, soup and bread like the ones Aaliyah's mom used to make. Mr. Collins smiled faintly. "This isn't how we usually dine, but I thought we'd keep it humble tonight." Ethan laughed softly. "It's perfect." As they ate, Ethan told him stories about Aaliyah, how she helped strangers, how she never gave up on him. His father listened, a proud smile spreading across his face. "She sounds like an incredible girl." "She is," Ethan said quietly. "She taught me that love isn't about what you have. It's about what you give." Mr. Collins nodded. "Then maybe we can start giving more." Ethan smiled. "I'd like that." After dinner, they sat in the living room, the fire crackling softly. The walls that once echoed loneliness now carried warmth again. For the first time, Ethan felt that this house, his house, was alive. He looked at his father and said, "Can we do something tomorrow?" "Anything," his father replied. "I want to go visit Aaliyah and her mom," Ethan said. "I want to thank them properly." His father smiled, eyes shining. "Of course. They saved my son. They deserve the world." Ethan looked into the flames and smiled softly. His heart was lighter than it had been in months. Forgiveness hadn't erased the past, but it had opened a door to a better future. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't looking back. He was ready to move forward, with a heart that forgives. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of winter morning that feels like a new beginning. Sunlight glittered on the snow outside the Collins mansion, and for the first time in years, warmth filled the air inside. Ethan stood by the window, dressed neatly in a dark blue coat. His heart raced with excitement and nerves. Today he was going back, not to the streets where he'd struggled, but to the tiny apartment where kindness had found him when the world had turned its back. His father, Mr. Collins, appeared at the doorway. "Ready?" he asked, a soft smile tugging at his lips. Ethan nodded. More than ever. They climbed into a sleek black car, but this time it didn't feel like a symbol of power. It felt like a vehicle for gratitude. The ride was quiet, filled with memories and hope. As the car turned into the familiar narrow lane, Ethan pressed his hand against the window, his eyes widening. The small, crumbling building stood exactly as he remembered it. Paint peeling, windows cracked but somehow still alive. Children played in the snow outside, their laughter echoing through the chilly air. When the car stopped, people from the neighborhood turned to stare. No one had ever seen a luxury car stop there before. The engine purred to a halt, and Ethan stepped out slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. Aaliyah was outside, helping her mother hang wet clothes on a line. She looked up when she heard footsteps, and her eyes widened in disbelief. "Ethan?" she gasped, dropping the cloth she was holding. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "Hey, Aaliyah." She blinked, tears already forming. "I thought I'd never see you again. The police came and they said you were found, but we didn't know where you went." Ethan stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "You saved my life, Aaliyah. You and your mom. I'll never forget that." When they pulled apart, Mrs. Carter stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. The moment she saw Ethan, she froze. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "You look so healthy." "So happy. What happened?" Ethan smiled softly. "I found my father." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the man standing beside the car. "Or maybe he found me again." Mr. Collins approached slowly, his expensive shoes crunching against the snow. His tailored coat and perfectly combed hair looked out of place in the humble surroundings, but his eyes, kind and humble, spoke volumes. "You must be Mrs. Carter," he said gently. "I'm Thomas Collins, and I owe you both more than words can express." Mrs. Carter looked startled. "Mr. Collins?" "As in—" "Yes," he said, nodding. "That Collins?" She blinked, unsure what to say. "Oh, my. Well, sir, we only did what any decent person would have done." He smiled faintly. "That may be true, ma'am, but not everyone would have opened their door to a freezing boy they didn't know. You gave him warmth when I failed to." His voice broke slightly. "You reminded me that humanity still exists." Tears welled in Mrs. Carter's eyes. "We just did what we could." Ethan stepped forward, holding her hands. "You did more than you'll ever know. You showed me what love looks like." Mr. Collins reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. "I know money can't repay what you gave my son, but I hope this can make life easier for you both." Mrs. Carter hesitated. "Sir, we can't accept—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "This isn't charity. It's gratitude." With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Her eyes widened when she saw the number. It wasn't just a thank you gift. It was a new beginning. Enough to buy a house, to start fresh, to live without fear of bills or eviction. I can't believe this," she whispered. "This will change everything." Ethan smiled. "That's the point. You changed my life. Now it's our turn." Aaliyah stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I know," Ethan said, looking at her kindly. "But I wanted to." Then suddenly he turned to his father and whispered something in his ear. Mr. Collins smiled and nodded. Ethan looked back at Aaliyah and her mom. "There's something else. Come with us." They exchanged a confused glance but followed. The car took them across town, to a quiet street lined with new houses. It was a developing neighborhood, clean, safe, filled with laughter and promise. The car stopped in front of a beautiful two-story home with white walls and blue shutters. A sold sign was planted in the yard. Aaliyah looked at Ethan, puzzled. "Whose house is this?" Ethan grinned. "Yours," Mrs. Carter gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Ethan, no, this is too much." "We can't accept—" "You have to," Ethan said firmly, his eyes glistening. "Because this isn't just a house. It's a thank you. It's a reminder that kindness always comes back." Aaliyah burst into tears, hugging him tightly. "You didn't forget us." Ethan smiled, hugging her back. "Never. You're my family too." Mr. Collins stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Mrs. Carter's shoulder. "We'll handle everything, taxes, maintenance, everything. Consider it our way of saying thank you for giving me my son back." Mrs. Carter shook her head in disbelief, tears falling freely. "You're good people," she whispered. Mr. Collins smiled sadly. "Not always, but we're trying to be." They spent the rest of the day inside the new house, exploring every room. Dahlia ran through the halls, laughing, while her mother stood in the kitchen, touching the countertops as if afraid it might all disappear. Ethan watched them, his heart full. For the first time, he understood the true power of kindness. It didn't just save people. It multiplied. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in golden pink, Ethan and his father stood outside the house. "You proud of yourself?" Mr. Collins asked, smiling warmly. Ethan shrugged playfully. "A little." His father looked at him, eyes soft. "Your mother would be too." Ethan smiled at the thought. She always believed in kindness. "I think she's watching right now." Mr. Collins placed an arm around his son's shoulder. "You've taught me something I should have known all along. Wealth means nothing without a heart to guide it." Ethan nodded. "And hearts grow when they give." They stood in silence, watching as Aaliyah and her mother laughed through the window, their faces glowing with joy. The cold wind swirled around them, but inside, warmth filled the air. It was more than just a happy ending when it was a full circle. One act of compassion from a girl who had nothing had rippled out to change lives she could never have imagined. Ethan had lost everything once, but in losing it, he'd found what truly mattered. Not the mansion, not the money, but love. As they drove home, Ethan looked out at the stars twinkling in the dark sky. He thought of that cold night when no one had stopped to help him, except one little girl. And now, because of her, hundreds of others would feel that same kindness. Because kindness doesn't end when it's given. It begins there. And sometimes, it takes one simple act from one brave heart to remind the world that love still wins.